Welcome to the Future Build podcast, where we explore the innovations, ideas, and individuals driving the built environment towards a more sustainable future. I'm your host, Martin Hearn, and in this special two-part episode, we're joined by someone whose work is as hands-on as it is visionary. Joel De Mowbray, co-founder of YesMake. Joel and his amazing team are doing something truly different. YesMake creates public infrastructure and community spaces using waste materials. They build with care, character, and an uncompromising commitment to circularity. Today, in this first part, we'll hear how it all started, Joel's story, the birth of YesMake, their creative ethos, and how they'll be turning waste into beauty every single day.
Joel, an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Honestly, big fan of the podcast, listen to every episode to date, so thanks for having me. Yeah, we're glad to be here.
Well, you get a load of time on site to do that, so I really appreciate it. We're here to cover all things circularity waste and the amazing work of YesMate, but what I always do on this podcast is I want to take it back to how did you get involved in the built environment and what's your journey, to founding YesMake?
I mean, much like many people, there's all sorts of convergent and divergent journeys I went on, but I grew up, for the most part, with my dad above his workshop, which was primarily timber. So from day one, I was making little lightsabers and carving little balls and jumping on projects with him. And then when I got to about 8, 10, I could start to hold bigger tools. And then when I was about 14, he'd have me on the angle grinder, skill me up on the chainsaw. And so I kind of always had a practice of physically making things. But we grew up in a very poor, dirty environment. And I looked at my surroundings and I wanted stability. I wanted to have an income. I wanted a degree of comfort. I wanted a lot of things that most people want. And so I wound up traveling through the kind of cycle training industry because I got a grant from TfL to train as a cycling instructor just before my 17th birthday. And that coincided with the time when TfL was starting to take cycling really seriously. And they realized that they couldn't just rely on the generations of highways engineers that had created the streets they were trying to change. They needed input from specialists in cycling. And so that created a bridge for me where we were starting to get consulted on how street environments should be designed. And then so that led me to move across from having spent 5 or 6 years in the cycle training sector, from delivering one-to-one and group training through to supporting TfL and other organizations on the design and the standards relating to the built environment. And then I moved into a local authority context to design and deliver those projects with local community groups. And that was a real insight.
And I imagine that you gave a very different perspective to a local authority environment.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was a different character. I was definitely a different character now. I think anyone listening that I've worked with, former colleagues, I brought a different energy to the table. I'm from London. I grew up in London, and I grew up all over London. Every 5 minutes on the clock face of London. We moved around a lot when I was a kid, with my mum, that is. And so my perspective is very, very, very strongly rooted in the lived experience of the general population. And most people working in the built environment will appreciate that in terms of the general population's exposure to our activities, a notice on a lamppost doesn't really mean anything to anyone. And so when it came to this was a problem local authorities were having, is they'd kind of ticked all the conventional statutory consultation requirements, but then when a shovel hit the road, nobody actually knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And so I came in to lead a much more kind of community-oriented delivery process. So actually what I was trying to do was outsource a lot of the Reba Stage 2 especially type activities to happen within the community, paying local people for their activities through various competitions and collaborative exercises. And, obviously opens your eyes to the generations of mistrust and in terms of the relationship between communities and local authorities. It opened my eyes to the huge amount of like goodwill and great intention that exists within local authorities. These are places full of great people trying to do good things. And unfortunately, the structures around that don't always make that possible. So it gave me those two, in some ways, opposing viewpoints. And then something I observed as it came through to delivery, the supply chain for creating a public realm project didn't have the capacity to match up to the kind of community-led process that we'd gone through with design. Let's say you're designing, a segregated cycle lane down an A road. And you've gone through months of, designing beautiful kind of placemaking features that complement local businesses. And you've got other organizations involved that want to use it for this and use it for that. And you've created all this great potential. And then actually that 12-month build period can completely unravel what you've been developing with people. And so it kind of created this aspiration in me to create an organization that had the capability and scale of a tier 1 contractor that might be a term contractor at a local authority, with the dynamism of a sole trader, so that you could still incorporate the community in the process of building these spaces. And so as I created YesMake and started building it out, that's exactly what we were doing.
So let's get on to YesMake, and it's an organisation that's rapidly scaling. But take us back to that sort of incarnation. What was or what is YesMake, and what did it really stand for?
Yeah, so I guess to the moment of inception, was, I can remember it so clearly. In Lambeth, I'd set up this thing called Public Realm Design Competitions, and it basically outsourced Reba Stage 2/3 by creating cash prizes for local people to design interventions that fit with the delivery criteria that we had. We were trying to make permeability better, we were trying to green places, we were trying to reduce crime and antisocial behavior, and we were trying to improve provision for walking and cycling more generally. And so we created a community judging panel based from all local organizations with technical representation from the local authority as well as political. And it must have taken a year to kind of convince people this was a good idea, create the kind of supporting infrastructure to make it happen. And I was in this meeting with the organization that we commissioned to deliver this public realm design competition program. And I was sitting on the other side of what was a Teams call. And I could tell so obviously that the best part of my day was the worst part of the person on the other side of this call's day. They got a call with the council to try to sort out some admin. Do you know what I mean? And I spent a year getting to this point, and I realized I'm on the wrong side of this table. And so I had that niggling feeling. And so I was working at Lambeth Council, which was an incredible local authority to work at. And I had a colleague called Seth, who was one of the founders of an organization called Resolve Collective. And I ran into him and his brother Akil one day at Max's in Brixton. And they were tipping away on the laptop. And I was like, what are you guys doing, like working out of hours and all that? And he started telling me that they set up Resolve Collective and he only worked part-time. And so my radar was pinging, like, I can do that. I could reduce and I could start to explore these ideas and get a bit of time back. And I will always be grateful to Resolve for putting that on my radar as an opportunity. And so from there, I went down to part-time. And the first thing I built was a community project in Hither Green called The Arc. And it was taking out 12 car parking spaces that had been closed using kind of street cones. And when I spoke to local people, everyone was like, I don't really know what's going on. Are they doing some building works here? Or nobody could read the street environment and understand why those cones had been placed there. And that meant that it wasn't serving its purpose, it wasn't getting used. And that intrigued me, and I thought, I know I can pull something together here. And I did.
And tell us about ARC, actually, because actually, when you formed as well, it probably couldn't have been, well, maybe it was a great time, but, it couldn't have been a worse time. We were very into COVID lockdown as well. So you had all the complexities or uncertainty of COVID at that time. But also, I personally think it was an amazing time for thinking about, communities getting together and engagement and public space as well.
Yeah, big time, because I think it was never more of a central issue than at that moment. So, and so I went down there, and at this point, I'm just a person walking into a shop, buying some stuff, and having a chat. And so I went down there and spoke with people, and everyone basically was saying the same thing as I said. Like, I don't really get what this space is all about. Why can't I park here? And so I had a bit of a network. I obviously understood the local authority context. So that very day, I drew up an initial concept for what the ARC might be. And anyone here, if you Google making space in Lewisham, a YouTube video will come up for you, which covers the whole build. Take a look. It was a very, very fun process. And
Clearly descriptions.
yeah, great. And so I contacted. But I had a couple of challenges, right? I've got a design. I need permission from the local authority, and I need money to build it. And so at this point in time, 12th of September, 2020, I think 2020. Yeah. And so 3 days later, I got the funding from a private company called Spin, who are a dockless scooter and bike operator.
All right.
That had found us because they wanted to show goodwill and show that they can create social value through what they were then going to do, which was tender to be a dockless operator in London. Sorted. I researched kind of the planning obligations that we were likely to encounter. And at that time, COVID regulations had allowed us that could happen within permitted development rights. So the approvals process was very, very swift. So September 12th, I went down there first time. By the end of the day, we've got an initial design. 13th, I go back there, walk through the design with all the local businesses, chat to as many people as I can. Everyone's into it. Made a little bit of an engagement report into kind of that, just to be able to substantiate those comments for a more technical audience in the local authority. The local authority at this point had something that did exactly what they wanted to do and didn't have to spend a penny. So they were pretty helpful in getting approval. So 12th of September, first time on site. 12th of October, we started building it. 4 weeks later, it was built. So we were finished by 30th, end of October, early November. Funny enough, the Friday we finished was whatever it was, second or third lockdown. So the timing was kind of great and terrible all at once, because we wanted to bring people together to celebrate, and it couldn't quite happen like that. But you'll see at the end of the video, if anyone does get to watch it, there was still a lot of celebration that took place legally.
It's clear from that project that you at YesMake have made things happen quickly. But tell us about a bit of the philosophy behind YesMake and what you stand for. You mentioned things like social value through that as well, community engagement. These are all things that are core, to your organisation.
Yeah, big time. I mean, so my dad, Joel De Mowbray, wonderful human. He never really made more than literally about 12 grand a year. But he always had this philosophy that access to beautiful things shouldn't be limited by your ability to pay for it. And so he only ever did, and does, he's still here, cracking on, he works with us full time, public projects. And so that was always part of our thinking. And then the second part, informed by my local authority experience, is that people need to get hands-on and stuck in. So, for example, the ARC had maybe a 18-meter long tabletop that ran the full length, and it was completely fabricated on site by the pub manager of the station pub on the corner next door. All of the planting was specified and installed by a resident that lived kind of 2 roads over. We got another woman who did like painted ladybirds all over the trees, just as like little things for the kids to find. And we had 8 to 10 other volunteers from the local area just getting stuck in. Neighbouring chicken shop, they kept us fed. The neighbouring flower shop, they kept us coffeeed. The fish and chip shop were always backing it as well. So it was just, a really beautiful moment of people coming together to help. And obviously you'll remember a time when anyone was desperate to get out the house. So we gave them something good to do.
I've looked through some of your projects, and they are truly inspiring. I would say sometimes they almost feel more like public artwork than placemaking or projects. Is that intentional?
Absolutely. So there's a quote above the arch, one of the arches at the V&A, which says, "The excellence of every art is in the complete fulfillment of its purpose." And what I interpreted that and apply that within our work is that structure has to be beautiful. You can't have an idea, build something, and then try and make it look nice. Polishing. I won't finish the phrase. The bones of it have to be beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's always been our principle from day one.
Yeah. How have you balanced, I suppose, one of the complexities, and you sort of touched on it there with the ARC, which is you deal with local authorities, and there's a huge, quite rightly focus on sort of health and safety. But at the same time, you feel like, you're a team of let's get this done, and let's remove some of those barriers. How do you balance that as an organization?
The two parts of me that come together to make Yes Make is a lifetime growing up making things with a wide range of materials in a wide range of contexts. And that combines with a professional experience within the local authority context, which is very nuts and bolts when it comes to all of those requirements. So when you put those two together, I've got the full spread of kind of legislative context or compliance that we need to meet in able to do all of those activities.
Yeah.
And that's a rare blend. And that's why we're very well received by local authorities, because they want organizations that can come to the table to meet their aspirations without introducing unnecessary risk around deliverability, compliance, and health and safety, CDM, and all of the other requirements that come into the mix. And so I think that's the sweet spot that I was kind of bringing together in creating Yes Make.
One thing we haven't touched on, but I think is probably one of the most exciting things that you do for me, and in particular, is your material use, and in particular, utilizing waste streams and also circularity, and also just as an organization, you absolutely walk the talk in terms of those. Tell us about that. Tell us about how that's ingrained in everything that you do.
Yeah. So, I mean, it starts as well with my dad. I was always watching him doing exactly that, putting waste into good use. I mean, when I first started, we spoke about this before, I was boxer tools on the train. If anyone's sitting on the train listening to this podcast, seeing someone in dirty shoes and ripped up trousers with a DeWalt box on their lap, that was me 4 years ago. And so in that mode where the material had to be on site already and I just had a box, I was limited. I had to tie into the kind of just-in-time construction model. And so when we were delivering the ARC, they were taking down a whole line of trees. And I couldn't help feeling that this is wild. We're using all of these ash branches that I've got from a forest from ash dieback to carve these whilst there's trees coming down right here. And so it's moments like that, and a lot of Yes Makers developed around moments that have just stuck with me. And it was seeing all those trees coming down and basically being fed into a chipper that made me think this makes no sense. And so at the time, me and my business partner, Morgan, were like, we should do something with these trees. And we realized the biggest cause that these were getting chipped on site is because there wasn't a means of taking them off and using them productively. So we retrofitted a 1980s electric milk float with a 4-ton winch and a timber crane on the back of it, and we're using that to reclaim whole trees from Southwark, Lewisham and Lambeth.
Amazing.
And that's where it started, and timber was the source that fed us through to the position we're in now. And so one side of it is the materiality and just the sheer clash of being exposed to the level of waste in our built environment sector. And then the other side of it is being an SME with the ability to set our own risk appetite. There's times when I say that's too risky, we're not going to go down that road. But equally, because I have a really deep foundational knowledge of the materials that we're using, I can know that whilst a designer may perceive that as risky, I understand characteristics of this material and I have zero doubt on its capability to meet all of the requirements that we're going to apply it to. So those two things come together quite nicely.
Yes, yeah. We talked about this on a call before, but I think it's a really important point. You mentioned it there as well, the arc, that almost those trees dictated that project. And I think, something we've talked about a lot is that you say almost the material brings the work. It almost manifests it. I'd love, just to give a few examples that we talked about before on that.
Yeah. This is something, even it's been a clash trying to educate my own team around that dynamic. So one example would be we were part of an effort, including a range of organizations, to reclaim around 250 tons of cross-laminated timber that was due to be disposed of because there was a CLT modular housing company based in Basildon that went bankrupt.
Wow.
And the liquidators needed to clear the space for a new tenant. They wanted it disposed of. They gave us 3 weeks to take all of that material. And if we could take it, it's ours. And if we can't, it's gone.
And just for context, what sort of, if you were buying that material raw, what sort of value is that?
That is a really hard thing to put an exact number on. What I could potentially do is say we've just taken a different batch of CLT, and that was 2 HIABs worth, and that was a £30,000 value in terms of its original value. This was 16 loads of flatbed Arctics, so bigger than a HIAB. So if you were to consider in the region of say 30k per vehicle,
wow,
you're looking at quite a substantial value on that.
Yeah.
Now, this hadn't been stored correctly. The company had gone into liquidation and all of this material had been left outside. So if I was to try and say that that was the value that we took on, it would be incorrect.
Yeah.
We had to work through it with a range of different partners to be able to grade the different stock based on its condition, and then be able to provide kind of structural assurances around how it could then be reused.
Wow. And I'd love to sort of delve into sort of, and this is probably quite nice about how it charts how you're scaling as well, but almost how you or how people find you and how you find these materials as well. Because, that going back to those sort of milk float days, you probably built relationships with local tree surgeons and, local authorities that, have their, departments doing that. But as you moved out of timber and into other waste streams, how do you come across those? How do they find you?
Yeah, so early days, the model was just always reply to a tree surgery's Instagram stories. They put a story out, like just arrived on site in Streatham, rare. We'd be on it in a heartbeat, and my partner at the time, Morgan, he'd be jumping in the wagon to get down there. And then we also had more, I guess, long-term relationships with like Southwark Trees. So we'd go down to their depot, we'd spray the trees that we wanted, and then they'd hold them whilst we kind of one by one took them away. And then we found ourselves in a really fortuitous space where, I'm sure many people listening are always looking for someone that can take this and put it to good use. Someone, because, just like vets don't get into the business to put animals down, architects don't get into the business to throw stuff away. And so even though we weren't necessarily working on steel or partitioning or glazing at the time, we were still getting a lot of inquiries from people saying, could you do anything with this? And so then it went from very much like on the ground contact with the people holding the chainsaws. And it moved. So I think another good example would be the redevelopment of Smithfield's Market in the city to become the Museum of London. So I think that may have been the first project that we stepped into a larger scale construction environment.
Yeah.
And that opened our eyes to the wider spectrum of materials that we should be establishing a way that we can put them to use. And so at Smithfield, to date, we probably took in the region of 18 to 20 tons of primarily timber, but also steel, cast iron, staircases, all sorts of other materials. And because we originated from a place where we were designing and building our own projects, I had the ability to walk around these sites and know exactly what we could use that for. So cast iron grating would allow us to have, say, 1 ton of ballast without doing any excavation and concrete foundations. And our structural engineer could kind of specify a layout that meant that 1 ton of cast iron grates located strategically in the structure would allow us to have essentially a freestanding structure that is safe as housing.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to touch on that sort of, as you scale and maybe on those available waste streams and maybe some of the barriers as well, because, if we're a contractor listening to this and they're thinking, well, we do loads of, whether it's commercial buildings or offices, rip out, they just need to get that stuff out quick. That must be a barrier to, to you on reuse as well. What's stopping people doing this?
Yeah, I think on the face of it, obviously strip out contractors and demolition contractors are holding the hammer, so to speak. But they are dictated by the contracts that they have been procured for and signed up to.
Yeah.
And every demolition and strip out contractor that I've spoken with will always do what's in the contract. That's the bread and butter of their business. So I wouldn't want to kind of say that any of those are a barrier. I think this is a contextual or a wider kind of holistic conversation in which if you're a developer, you don't want to procure a strip out contractor on the basis of them delicately removing every item if there's no onward route for those items. So it's kind of chicken and egg. And if you're a strip out contractor and we've come along and you're under contract, you're either dealing with a really significant variation to delicately remove glazing panels or whatever it might be, which is well beyond the scope of your contract. And so that's a scenario that we find ourselves in reasonably often, is where we have entered into the stage of a development where they're under contract. But what we've been working on, we've got a pretty strong strategy as to how we make sure that we enter the conversation pre-planning application.
Right.
Because pre-application, there's still working on a lot of those contracts, and there's the ability for us to influence the developer towards a scope of works that pulls these things out delicately, being able for us to give them the assurance that we can put them to good use. And potentially from that, you unlock all of the barriers that we've got right now when it comes to material extraction. Yeah. But it's the circular economy, right? I'm sure there are a lot of people that are frustrated or would love that it was moving faster, or, it's not nice that as designers and contractors, there's still a lot of activity going on where you're doing something that is against your values.
Yeah.
And I guess, and that's all true, and those feelings are all valid. But on the flip side of that, the world that I occupy right now is everybody from manufacturers to deconstruction to big demolition contractors to architects to structural engineers, all wanting to make this happen. And it's happening, and it's happening fast. And so I don't see any one individual trade or discipline as a barrier to this. I think there's been a long lead-in period of things akin to focus groups or think tanks or, environments where they've brought together the best of the minds on this to kind of tackle some of the larger existential questions on the circular economy. And what I find really interesting is that on a policy level, it's so easy to say you need that spread of disciplines in the room for us to solve this correctly. But the way that most companies are structured doesn't reflect that range of disciplines. And so you need formats that involve hands with the same range of skill sets that currently involves minds. And that's what we have been creating. We'll probably come on to in a little bit.
Well, that's it. I want to touch on that. And I think because you are a perfect example of circularity in action. And I think, as an industry, we do a lot of roadmaps and, reports but you're doing it, you're at the coalface and it's been interesting sort of, charting how you've, developed from those small days of, being very quick reactive on timber, but now moving into different waste streams. Love to touch on maybe, what you're doing outside of timber and how those are being utilized. But also I'd love to sort of, you must get offered a load of stuff. People come up to you and go, do you want this? And it must be hard. You've got to turn some of that down as well. And I'd love to sort of touch on that as well, of what you take on and what you just can't.
Yeah, absolutely. So as this conversation moves towards the future of the circular economy and our role in it, there's going to be a lot of answers that are today, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, because we've got our map of where we're going. And so some of my answers might not necessarily be today, but is end of the year, etc. So right now, we have a relatively small workshop based in Canada Water at the Paper Garden in Southeast London. And within that workshop, we operate a closed loop model whereby all of the processing waste that is generated from our workshop has an end use. So all of our planer shavings and kind of dust extraction goes to animal bedding with a farm that's based about 5 minutes down the road from us, Surrey Docks Farm. I had my 18th birthday there. I used to go there from day one. I said my first ever sentence there. I'd love to tell that story, but I think I better get to it. It's there. And so once a month they come and they take about 3 to 5 ton bags worth of animal bedding. And that serves them in delivering corporate volunteering days, which is a really important revenue stream.
Yeah.
So I say all this because I can't allow materials to enter our workshop where the waste that we would create from processing them would contaminate our own waste so that it then couldn't be used for animal bedding. Our offcuts, we run a program called Offcut Improv, where people come down to the workshop and basically use offcuts to make things they need for their own house.
Oh, wow.
That's everything from shelves to coasters to like mirror frames, picture frames, chopsticks. There's a lot you could make. Also kind of, all right, you're in your bath, right? Those little tables that span across the top of the bath and you've got your soap, you've got your shampoo, maybe a book on there.
A glass of wine.
Even maybe a candle. Treat yourself. People make all sorts.
Yeah.
And so pretty much every little nugget that flows through our workshop has a place that it's then going to go.
Wow.
And that's how we work today.
Yeah.
We've been constrained by the size of our workshop. It's pretty pokey. And by the size of our storage capacity. And as we stand today, those constraints are largely lifted from us as we've established a new site in East London where we've got the capacity for a workshop that's near enough 10 times the size of our current workshop.
Oh, wow.
And a storage capacity that's probably 20 to 30 times the size of our current capacity. And so where, for example, a year ago, I had to say no to hundreds of fire doors on a monthly basis because they're mainly made from a veneer and then there's a chipboard core, and the chipboard involves a lot of glues, and those glues can't go into animal bedding. Whereas today we've got the capacity to take on those fire doors and to hold a range that allows us to apply them both back as a fire door, but also to explore alternate uses where we have a body of fire doors that doesn't meet kind of demand trends or doesn't meet current standards, because a lot of these materials might have gone in 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
Well, and so, one area I know you're moving into already is around glazing, and in particular, sort of office partitions. Tell us a little bit about, maybe some of the challenges with glazing, but also what you're doing with it.
Yep, absolutely. So if I can step back one step, which is, timber had got us to where we were, and we had an opportunity to expand our operations to cover a broader spectrum of circular materials. And so the approach that I took to exploring what we wanted to do was to essentially go by the quantity of materials arising through the remaking of our built environment. So how many glazed partitions, how many fire doors, how many, as one factor. And the second factor was the embodied carbon with any given material.
Right.
So that we could directly target our efforts to the greatest level of impact in terms of embodied carbon at scale. And glazing is right up there. Within the steel, I felt at the time that was largely covered. Interestingly, it's not as covered as I thought, and there's a lot that we will be doing in the steel space to unlock some of the barriers at the moment to reusing structural steel. But coming back to glazing, most of the glazing in London's existing building stock is one of the leading causes of heat loss in a given building. And that means that the quantum of exterior glazing as well as interior meeting room partitions coming out of buildings is vast.
Yeah.
Vast. Take one example, Canary Wharf, one tower, I won't name it. It's got 4,200 windows that all need to be replaced within the next 3 years.
Right.
And that's one building. And so it was exposure to that led me to say, right, glazing, let's look at this. Like, what is it? What is it? What are its characteristics? What's causing it to be kind of disposed of or recycled at the moment? And what can we do to bring it into reuse? And credit to Saint-Gobain and their recycling efforts. So for the most part, the practice is smash it and sweep it.
Yeah.
And it goes into ton bags, and that cullet goes back to be smelted back down to create new flat glass. And that is a great thing. And I have some conversations with Saint-Gobain, and I'm really excited to collaborate with them because I think they're clearly leading the way.
Yeah.
But the next stage, hopefully for both Saint-Gobain and for us, is about how do you put this glazing back into reuse? And glass is a very inert material. Timber, you leave it outside in an external environment for 3-5 years, it's going to go grey. 8-10 years, it's probably going to start to perish a bit.
Yeah.
Glazing's quite different. It's very inert. That doesn't mean that you can just assume glass coming out of a building is ready to go. Far from it. But knowing how inert that is as a material leads you to ask, why is it being replaced? And for the most part, it's the spacer bar and the butyl seal and the argon fill. And those are the core elements of an insulated glazed unit that limit the duration of warranty and the performance of that as a building layer. And so our approach is to correct what's broken or what needs replacing, which is that spacer bar and the butyl seal, and to reuse the components that are inert and are in good condition, which is the glazing. So that's what we're establishing currently. And welcome partnerships from any glazing contractors and from Saint-Gobain and other organizations that are big in the glazing game. We've put together a pretty unreal, it feels like Avengers Assemble in terms of the team that we've got going on the glazing. But our model is always collaboration over competition. And so whoever you are, if you have an interest in glazing, if you have an interest in reusing glazing, I'm sure my contact details will be somewhere on this. and welcome any contacts. Yeah, hit me up.
We're going to do a massive call to action at the end because I think Yes Make Art, you were just so collaborative. I think that's a really important part, of what you do. Love to touch, always go back a little bit maybe on some of the other projects that you've done or doing, because it's very clear that you've sort of developed a long way since the Arc. And back then it was probably more placemaking projects, but you've said it yourself, you're now moving more into the sort of mainstream built environment. Tell us about some of those sort of projects that changed the direction of Yes Make along the time, and maybe give us a glimpse into the future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So after the Arc, we delivered a range of landscaping and kind of public art installations. Because what you might not know is that we have a full kind of landscaping division within the business, because landscaping, just as above ground architecture and is just as problematic.
Yeah.
And so we've been working across that environment as well. So we delivered loads of work in Waterloo Green and in parks, kind of particularly across South London. And then that led to us working on a couple of buildings. So we delivered a couple of buildings in Southwark, one at Styles House, and these are community buildings. And so, yeah, this is a lovely example. I didn't think to talk about it, but thanks for asking, because so we did this. It's kind of a community centre in a community garden on a housing estate in Southwark. And so we drew it up with the residents, literally in the lift bay, on the ground floor of their tower. And we had them directly involved throughout the production of that space. One that comes to mind is we did scorched larch cladding. So that's where we had reclaimed larch, and you take a roofing torch and you scorch it. It's a Japanese method, shasugi-ban, and there's a lot of scorching to do on all that cladding for all that building, and it's also a very fun activity.
Yeah.
So we had everyone from, I think the youngest was probably about 23, all the way up to women in their 80s on the blowtorch doing it with us. And we're kind of supervising and make sure the quality is right. And I think every project has kind of been one up from the next so far. And all of that creates new opportunities. So then from there, we built 2 parks in Stratford on the Carpenter's estate. And our method when it comes to designing with local communities is very ethnographically driven. So we will base ourselves in the location for the duration of our work on that project. So we were based on site in the Carpenter's estate at the Dovetail Community Cafe there for about a year. And it meant that when they're running clubs, we're in the mix.
Yeah.
You can have dynamic conversations every day. It's not like you're losing time because you need to go to site to find this out or anything like that. We're in the mix every single day. And it means that you uncover all sorts of networks and all sorts of people that you would not be exposed to if you're just doing kind of dip-in evening events at a venue, trying to get down people from the community. We get a real level of depth from that. And then once you've kind of gathered a lot of design information, you need to communicate back to the community. And everyone here is going to know drawings can often be a barrier to that.
Yeah.
So we made scale models and kind of museum booths for the models and installed them on street.
Oh, wow.
So they were installed on site, actually at the spaces that we were going to be building. Because as I mentioned at the start, a piece of paper on a lamppost, who's going to notice?
Yeah. Yeah.
But when this thing turns up, you can't not notice it. And that's typically how we work, is to be a presence that you cannot ignore. And the museum booths that we created were weather tight and completely chalk painted.
Wow.
So every morning we'd write a question, and every next morning we'd take a photo of the day before, clean it off, and ask a next question. And it meant that we could have really granular conversations with a lot of people over the course of about 6 weeks. And that really, really, really strongly informed some very specific design choices in there.
I think there's, I'm listening to this, I'm thinking that is absolute best practice that you can possibly get in terms of, resident engagement. We have main contractors, we talk about resident engagement all the time. We're doing a whole retrofit, mini series of podcasts at the moment, and probably every single guest has talked about resident engagement and the importance of it. You live and breathe that. What I'm quite interested in is that as you scale, there might be a contractor listening here going, well, I can't do that on the level, because I'm doing X many projects. How do you keep that ethos and that sort of can-do attitude, if you are scaling as well?
Yeah, great question. So none of the things that I've just described are additional to the way that we work. That's the way that we go about doing what we do. So scaling for me is disseminating those practices and also hiring people that come from the right disciplines to be able to enter that space with confidence. Because there's a lot of people that, for example, an engagement event in an evening is a nerve-wracking thing. It's uncomfortable. Do you know what I mean? You feel a lot of pressure around it. Whereas because of the way that we work, it's the complete opposite. Like we love going out and meeting people, and it's a good crack, and we bring a vibe and we have a great time together. And so, it's near enough a hobby, if you know what I mean, in terms of the joy that we come from it. So, for example, sometimes we'll come down and we'll do a barbecue, and it comes from the place where if you're working with the general public, you are competing for their attention.
Mm.
And if you don't think you're competing, then you've just explained to yourself why turnout isn't quite what you want it to be. Or why the turnout you're getting doesn't cover the range of community that you want to have in the room. And so we compete. And we have a lot of fun doing it. Does that make sense how I talk about competing now?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because
I suppose your challenge is then it's bringing like-minded individuals into the organization. As your team builds, you need more people like you, more people like, your team already.
I'll do you another call out.
Sure.
So if you're someone with practical experience on the tools, that is an outgoing personality that loves working with people, and you have a kind of operational and a design mindset, let's talk. Because that's the type of people we're looking for. They can come from an events background, an anthropological background, an architectural background. And this is where we hire quite diversely in terms of the skill sets that we're looking for. And it's those things you can't teach.
Yeah.
Is what we're looking for. So if any of that is you on the headphones, hit me up.
What I love is that you do things completely different. And actually, we're doing something completely different on this podcast as well. It's probably worth mentioning. This is going to be our first two-part. We'll share the announcement. Not too much innovation, but it's something different. So we're going to do a two-part. It's probably worth talking about that second part, and you've already alluded to this, is really going to be that next chapter of Yes Mate, looking at your new site, your new operation, and absolutely what's possible. But let's give a tease to that actually, because again, you've talked a lot about how Yes Make as an organization, is developing, is changing. One of the things I know that you're starting to look at is how do you move from that sort of material pickup and sort of reuse to actually maybe, reconstruction or demolition side of things as well. So talk us a little bit about maybe what's the next, let's not go 5 years because we'll save that for the next podcast, but maybe what the next 12 months looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So to give it its kind of heading is we are specializing in the physical operations of the circular economy in London. Our objective is to create a regenerative supply chain for the built environment sector, and that's exactly what we're doing. Now, that comes from seeing and hearing and being directly involved with all of the barriers that surround the circular economy today. Logistics, storage, insurance, warranties, processing, supply chain, all of those issues is our business. That's our business. And in terms of how we slot in is to focus on our core competencies and to bring in the core competencies of a wide range of collaborators. So that's where I'm talking about direct involvement from manufacturers, direct involvement from architectural practices, insurers, etc. Much like I was describing the think tank context that's had a lot of diverse minds looking at the topic, we're bringing together the diverse hands to the topic. In doing so, as I mentioned before, our strategy is to work from the highest volume, highest carbon down that list. And the only thing that tempers that is the condition and the ability to remove it and the kind of practicals that come through there. So partnerships with deconstruction, demolition contractors is really important. And again, the problem I mentioned earlier about getting into the mix too late is what we're working to resolve right now. So we help developers to be able to expand the scope of circularity happening within their project. And depending on the local planning authority that a developer is within, often that circularity percentage can be a criteria that weights the application. And so we can help developers with that. And then second, when it comes to the demolition contractor or the deconstruction contractor, we want to be coming in with those organizations pre-tender so that we can, number one, enhance their social value offer, because a lot of our materials are disseminated through high social value contexts. But equally, we can bring down some of their costs, as well as working around where the deconstruction of an element may incur new cost. So we need to work with developers to specify it, to allow deconstructors to do it. And we need to be there for deconstructors to have a reliable way that they know, it's not, where's Joel? We're they said they were picking it up on Wednesday. No. We're there 24 hours notice, we're there.
Yeah.
Next day, 7 a.m., we're there. Because demolition contractors and deconstructors need just as much reliability to know that their loading bay is going to be cleared when they need it cleared, and that material will go on. And part of the way that we're working with them is to provide off-site deconstruction, because most people that would be interested in this podcast will probably be aware that currently circular endeavors result in a cost and a program implication at the moment that adds time and cost into the situation. And our objective in about 3 to 5 years' time is that circularity is either cost neutral or cost saving. But I think that's definitely for the next MPA.
And just, touching on that, do you see a world where maybe demolition doesn't exist anymore and it's only deconstruction?
It's an interesting one. I walk around a lot of large scale buildings, and you're engaging with a building that was not conceived with this in mind. And I have to make some quite hard choices about what we choose to do and what we choose to let go. And I think the time that you're talking about probably comes towards the end of the kind of replacement cycle of the building stock that currently exists.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of historic connection methods and detailing that results in waste. And demolition is the activity that's going to be required.
Yeah.
I don't really like saying that. It's kind of a dirty truth.
Yeah.
There's an extent to which the harms of the past, we have to deal with them. And so, an example is going to be plastered walls with plasterboard. Today's environment makes it impossible that the cost mechanisms or the contract mechanisms create a situation where, for example, this plastered room, we can say, I'll take all of those walls. We can't.
No.
And so I think demolition will exist for as long as there is building fabric that cannot be dismantled and reused. And as demountable and deconstructible elements are increasingly specified within new buildings, the portion of deconstruction relative to demolition will just grow and grow and grow and grow and grow.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think that the fundamental change is going to be designing our buildings for reconstruction, or deconstruction in that sense, and reuse, treating buildings as material banks, as we should be doing. But you're right, we need to phase out those, those older buildings that just sadly have materials we can't reuse.
And there's one other factor here, which is, in a way, aesthetics and practicals. So right now we're in a room that has a suspended ceiling with ceiling tiles and light fittings mounted into that. That is a typology that is far less common these days. Nowadays, a lot of, we would probably be sitting in a room that had an exposed ceiling and we'd be able to see all of the M&E. And so there you've got a change in the demand for an existing product. So this is an interesting kind of category of material for us, where it's about us designing new demand routes for a material that has had its demand base collapse as a result of design preferences changing.
And actually, weirdly, when this office is being refurbed, these are coming out and they want it exposed. So it's no surprises. So.
And so, just as I shouted out Saint-Gobain, seeing tile manufacturers like SAS, we would love to be working with you. We're working to design your existing products into new uses. That sounds like something that is very much in your interests. And I think the only reason we haven't been connected to date is we're all busy people, aren't we? But that's where we'd love to be working with manufacturers like SAS and others.
It's a great way to close off this first part. And I think let's do that call out. So if I'm an architect listening to this, I'm a local authority, I'm a contractor, you've done this sort of, material supplier. How do we get involved? How do we, or who do you want to be talking to? What's those conversations you want to be having? How do we get involved with YesMake?
Thank you for teeing me up like that. Really appreciate it. So if you're an architect working on a project of any scale and you're interested in exploring what materials within your project can be reused, we're here. You may already be working through a digital platform. We work across all of those digital platforms. So you don't necessarily need to feel like we're an additional layer to that. But if you want to, I guess, explore it in more detail, because the pre-development audits obviously inventory everything, but that doesn't necessarily, there's still a kind of a jump-off point from there as to what is and isn't usable. It's great to know everything that you have. We can help with what you do with it. And that spans everything from removing materials. Oh, what was it? 2 weeks ago, we took Elton John's kitchen. Oh, wow. As a nice example. So yeah, really interested to develop conversations with any architecture practices that are interested in understanding how they can reuse the existing materials within a building they're working on. Then when we get on to new project delivery, we collaborate with architecture practices, particularly through REBA stages 2, 3, and 4. And so if you're pre-tender looking to put a bid together, get in touch. We can collaborate and support on the bid writing and bring both the social and the environmental value to the table on that. So for new buildings, we're working on a couple. We're doing a 2-story community building right in the heart of the city. And we're looking at being able to deliver approximately 80 to 90% of the fabric of that building using entirely reused materials. So if that is a method that interests you, I'd love to hear from you. And finally, if you're a material manufacturer or if you work for a material manufacturer and you're interested in being able to collaborate with smaller organizations that can be a bit more dynamic, we're here. And we'd love to work with you. And I guess the final call out is, if I've said anything else that interests you and you just want to reach out, hit us up. We're also at YesMakeLDN on Instagram. If you DM, I'll get back to you straight away. It's not necessarily me. It might be a colleague, but Instagram DMs is a great way of getting an immediate response. Otherwise, you can hit us up through the website.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joel. And thank you for your time today. And for part 2, I think we'll be on site.
That's right. So part 2, we're going to be getting on site at our new site, which is a collaboration between us, Material Cultures, Resolve Collective, the GLA, and a wide range of other partners. And that is going to be the home of London's new regenerative supply chain for the built environment sector. All in part 2.
Amazing. Well, stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.